Probably outlet.
Is yours working, Brendan?
I think I remember last time I had something where...
This is what it should currently be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm there.
Tyler,
Yeah.
still didn't do your updates.
I know. I was trying to figure out what my app was. I asked my dad, but he was in California. He's coming back today, so I'll update it.
It's every file.
So Mike, that IB action that we set up, okay, so that's associated with the go back button, right?
Correct, on page 2.
All right, I'm going to delete that really quickly and do a new one. Is yours working, Brendan?
No, it was like...
Can you look at that again, Kyle? Can you look at that with Brendan? Yeah. See where the error is? Can you look at it now? We're just going to keep going. What's the error, Kyle? I don't know if that's good. Alright, James, did you know what's wrong? What was wrong? What was wrong?
Hold on.
That was, it's connected twice. And you loop. So in other words, you had two. One that was probably going to work, the other one was trying to go back to something that didn't exist.
So we go back button. Alright, so we're good then? Okay. Alright, Mike, go ahead, we're ready.
All right. So let's go here.
So follow along, and if you get stuck with anything, make sure you say it, okay? Because otherwise, we're gonna get caught up with errors that will hold you back.
All right, and I've already been recording, so we're if you need to go back later and rewatch the video, you can do that and follow along. You know, if there's something you missed and we have to keep trucking, then you can always go and see it. Okay, so this last time what we did was we looked at a couple of different things. So when we go with this first screen and we click this, there we go. On this first screen and we say go to page 2, we did this as a normal segue where we were able to do a control, click, drag to take us to that second screen. Just to show that to you real quick, just to reinforce that. I'll go ahead and remove that segue. And all we did is click on this button, press the control key and hold it, and drag over to that second screen. And it gets us there. Then we click on show. Alright, so it's as easy as that to move from one screen to another. But like we pointed out last time, we do lose some control. We don't have the granular control over that, seemingly, if we if we use Apple's tools to do that. And what we looked at last time is this idea of if I do a control back from the go back button, instead of it dismissing the second screen and just going back to the original screen, what it did is it created a new copy of the original screen. So that's not what we're looking for either. Because now we have like 5 versions of screen number 1 popping up on the screen, and they're all just in this giant stack, taking up system memory and changing the state. So if we had a number entered into a text box in this first screen, in fact, let's actually show that just so you can see it happen, because I want to look at getting some input into our program. So I'm going to go over here. We're on our first screen, the pink screen here, and we're going to go over to the right. We're inside of main storyboard, and we're going to grab a text box because we want to be able to read in some input from the user. So we'll just drag it out here onto the screen. Just put it somewhere underneath the go to page 2 button. All right, and so for right now, I'm gonna break our go back button on the other page. So I'm just gonna do a control drag back to the first screen and say show. Segues supersede IB actions. So that code that we wrote that was an IB action here in page 2, this guy, he won't actually get called because we just did a segue from that button back to the main screen. So that segue will take precedence over this back button. All right, so usually you wouldn't have both. Usually we would just delete the back button action. In fact, let's just do that. You wouldn't rely on knowing that the precedence thing happens. We're going to bring that back button back in a second, so if you don't want to delete it, that's fine. So I'll come in here, we'll click on this back button. I'm going to go to the outlets and just make sure he's disconnected. Okay, so if we see here, this touch up inside for the go back button is still connected to this back button, that's going to cause our program to crash because it's connected up to something that doesn't exist. So once we remove the code, we need to go in here to our storyboard and make sure we delete this as well, just so we're not connected up to something that isn't actually there. So the way our code works right now is we have our main screen, this pink screen that pops up. We have a text box that's on it. We can click on go to page 2. It takes us to page 2. When we click go back, it's using Apple's built-in segue to do this, and it's actually going to create a new copy of page 1. So now we're creating multiple copies. So if we go ahead and run this, I'm going to click on our text box here, and depending on what mode your simulator's in, you may or may not see the keyboard pop up. You can go to hardware and do toggle software keyboard, or you can hit Command K, will do the same thing, and that'll show you what that keyboard would look like. But you can type in with your normal keyboard. But one thing to keep in mind when you're designing an iPhone application is know that this keyboard's going to take up the bottom, third of your screen, the bottom, 40% of your screen. So you want to design your interface above that. All right, so we'll just type in like a number. We'll type in the number 5, just so we have something in that text box. All right, so now we're going to go to page 2, and I'm going to go back to the first page, and notice there's no 5 there, because this is a brand new version of that first page. That makes sense?
So what for you guys? Speak up if you're stuck.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Okay.
We're good?
You have a text box in there, you have the segue.
And we're going to be undoing most of this stuff here in a second. I just wanted to show you the ramifications of that segue.
Okay.
All right, so understand that guy's a problem. So we're going to go on to that second page now, and I'm going to remove that segue, and we'll go back and we'll put that IB action back in. And just as an exercise, let's practice putting IB actions in. So we're on this page 2 guy here, and remember I deleted that code a few minutes ago. So
If it didn't work the first time, you're going to want to get it to work this time. Go
Yeah.
back.
So inside of our page 2 guy here, we used to have some code sitting right in here, and I deleted it. So we're going to just look at what it takes to put that back in, just to reinforce that. So rather than using the built-in segues, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on the yellow circle up here, which allows us to kind of grab the entire view controller. Then I'm going to click on the 2 little circles up top here that are kind of interchanged. This is the assistant editor. What this is going to do is it's going to bring in it's going to slide in the code associated with, for right now, we can think of it as whatever view controller we have selected. That's why I made sure to select this view controller first. So I click the view controller, I click the 2 circles, it slides the code associated with page 2 in onto the screen.
Is it you guys both have that split screen? Okay.
Yeah, we're done.
Yeah.
Okay. So now once you have the split screen, now we're able to connect stuff from this main screen onto this from our interface into our code. And this is something called MVC, Model View Controller. So we have our interface in one place, our code in another place, but now we need to connect these guys somehow. And we really have 2 different types of connections. We have IB actions, and then we have IB outlets, which we're going to look at here in a few minutes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on the go back button. I'm going to hold down the control key. I'm going to drag into the code somewhere. I usually put it after Viewdidload, but before did receive memory, but it doesn't really matter as long as you don't put it inside one of these guys. And Apple should prevent you from doing that. But one thing to be careful of is I think it'll let you put it underneath a function here, but before the opening curly brace. Don't do that. That's going to be bad news, and it's going to give you weird problems with your code. So comfortably put it between your functions. All right, so somewhere in here is going to be perfectly acceptable. So we'll let go of that, and now we have this little pop-up that asks us what type of connection this is. And as I mentioned a minute ago, we have 2 different types. We have outlets and we have actions. In this case, we're creating an action, which means we're associating a function with an event that occurs on our screen. So we're going to choose an action. All right, and the name for this guy, I think we called it before back button pressed, but you can call it elephant smile if you wanted to. It doesn't matter. Whatever you want to call it is fine, but usually you want to have your functions name something that is meaningful so you can go back and find it later in code. Then go ahead and just hit the connect button. Those other things we'll mess with at another point in time, but right now the default's fine. All right, so then in code, if right now you can just go back to the code if you want, or you can edit it right here. Depending if you're on a laptop screen, you might have things might be pretty squished right here, so you could just hit the X up in the upper right-hand corner there, and then just click on your page 2 code, and you'll see that that code is there, and we can go and put some stuff in between the curly braces. So this is where the logic associated with that function is going to go. And what we want to do is we want to go back to that original screen, and for us right now, the magic code to do that is self.dismiss view controller animated, and we'll say yes, we want to animate it. Times when you would say no, false to animating it would be if you're doing a transition between screens that the human being is not going to see. Something is happening in the background or something. So why waste CPU time or anything like that animating something that somebody's not going to see?
So when you start typing self.dismiss, you can just choose one of the other. See what that came up? So you just choose the dismiss view controller and put true for the first parameter. Yeah, Mike.
Okay, so then you can either tab over or just click on the second guy. And later on, we might look at using this type of animal as something called a closure. But for right now, we're trying to keep things as simple as possible. So just press enter and let Xcode do its magic for that. All right, it's going to put in some stuff. And I'll just put a comment in here kind of letting you know visually what this is for. So this is code that executes after the screen has transitioned away. So if for some reason you wanted to accomplish something after we dismissed that view controller, you would put that code in here. This type of animal is called a closure. In other languages, in fact, actually, it's used quite often in JavaScript. So maybe you've seen that before. Callback functions. Have you guys messed with callback functions at all?
Yeah.
You did.
Yep. So this is effectively a callback function. This is a function that we want Swift to call upon completion of dismissing this view controller. That's what that guy is. But right now, we don't have anything special we want to accomplish, so we're just going to leave that blank. It's just part of the syntax, okay? So we're not going to actually put any logic in here. I just threw a comment in there. Okay, so now our back button should be working again, and we go back out to our storyboard, make sure we don't still have that segue in here going from our get back button back, because like I said before, that'll take precedence. So now we are using Apple's built-in segues to go from page 1 to page 2, but we're using an IB action to get back. So we'll see this, and we should see our number still in our text box. So proving that we're getting back to the original screen. So we'll go ahead and put our 5 in here. We'll go to page 2. We'll go back, and there's our 5. All right, that makes sense?
Yep.
All right, so now we're going back to the original screen. All right, so now a problem that we have to often deal with. So kind of what I'm building up here is this almost a little a tool set. So we're
Like, one second.
Sure.
Minor kind of error too, but it didn't realize it was that. There's a it's not it had returns the same error. Just I don't want to see.
You okay? Is Brandon okay?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we've proven we can get back to the screen from page 2, and we're definitely coming back to the original screen because we still see our text in the text box. So now one problem that we want to solve next. So I was mentioning that we were trying to build up a tool set of almost like a collection of Legos that we're going to use to solve our initial problem. So anytime we write an app, we're going to have to write that app in terms of the things we already know how to do. We don't want to rely too much on, at least not initially, on things that we suspect you can do or that you've seen in somebody else's app, but that is a little bit outside of your wheelhouse right now. All right, so we want to build our apps in terms of things we know how to do. So right now we know how to set up view controllers, change the background color, drop some buttons on them, things like that. We know how to segue the easy way from one screen to another screen. We know how to programmatically, through an IB action, go from one screen back to another screen. So these are some tools that are now in our toolbox. So what we'd like to do now is we'd like to somehow get this number 5 to go from our first screen to our second screen. We'd like to pass that piece of information from one screen to another. That's going to be handy for us to be able to send information from one screen to another. Okay, so we need to look at strategies for doing this. Now before, and we're doing it right now, we have our label that's up here. And I think we had set up on our original screen, we had set up an Iboutlet. It's just, well, if we didn't, we're gonna look at one now anyways. So what we want to do is we're gonna go to our second screen and we're gonna give ourselves a label and we're gonna set up an Iboutlet proving that we can write something to that second screen. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to drag a label onto our green screen or whatever color you made yours. And I'll stretch this guy out a little bit. All right, so right now he's just going to say label. All right, so now we're going to do the exact same mechanics as we did before to connect our button up to an IB action. So we click on the view controller, then we click on the 2 circles that slides in the code. So exact same movement we did before. We're going to click on our label. Okay, so we're going to drag it into our code, but instead of creating an IB action, we're going to create an Iboutlet. What an Iboutlet does is it gives us a variable here in code that allows us to manipulate, in this case, this label. So I'm going to hold down the control key, we're going to drag from the label into code, and I usually put all of my IB outlets at the very top, so above Viewdidload, okay? But after the opening curly brace for our UI view controller. So somewhere right in here, I'll let go. The connection type is an outlet by default, so before we drop down and we hit action, notice action isn't even as an option here because this is a label. Labels aren't like clickable. All right, so we're going to leave it as outlet and we're just going to call this guy the label. Okay, so that's us associating a variable in code called the label that links to this physical label on our interface. So go ahead and hit connect, and now we have a new variable that just popped into our code called the label of type UI label, and now we can talk about that label in code. All right, so leave it at that for right now. Let's go ahead and run our program again, and it'll
Hang on 1 second. What happened? Remember camel case?
CHE then. Alright, I got it.
Probably good. Okay, so we should be able to run that now. So we should run it, right, Mike?
Yep, we're going to go ahead and run this.
For sure.
And on that second screen, if you go ahead and just click go to page 2, we should just see a label that says label on it right now.
Okay.
All right, so now what we want to do is we want to programmatically update the value on that label, just proving that we have access to that label. So we just gave ourselves access through that Iboutlet. Now we want to prove that we actually can do something with it. So we're going to set the text on this label when this page 2 is created to woot. All right.
Mike, the shelter in place is going off, so I'm just going to turn the computer around.
Okay.
So,
Here, I'll pause the recording.
okay.
All right.
We're good?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so last thing we saw here is that we have our second screen showing up with that label on there. So we want to go ahead and just prove that that label is connected up through our code, so we're going to just set the value, set the text for that label to something when that second screen shows up. So we're going to go to our page 2 Swift, and we're going to just do this inside of Viewdidload. So I'm going to throw a comment in Viewdidload here just to add this to our kind of our tool set. So this function is our first opportunity to use the widgets that live on this screen. All right, so Viewdidload means that the MVC implementation, that is the physical interface, has linked to this code behind. So all the stuff that's on our interface actually exists right now rather than it being an idea. Okay, before this function actually gets called, even though we have this advertised linkage here, this Iboutlet that's going to connect to that label, that connection has not actually been made because the label doesn't exist yet. So this is our first opportunity to actually interact with that label. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in a second. So we're going to do this. So I'm going to say, we're going to talk to our label. So we're going to say self.thelabel.text is equal to woot. So we're going to programmatically change the text of that label at runtime to be woot instead of the default value that it currently says, which is label. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and run this. And when we go to that second screen, we should see woot.
What is that?
I got it.
All right.
We're good?
No.
All right, so now we have woot. So we've proven that that second screen can show that value. Okay, so now we're going to look at how we can let that second screen, because understand the problem we're trying to solve here is how do we type something on this first screen, like a 5, press the go to page 2 button, and have that 5 show up in this label. That's ultimately what we're trying to accomplish. How do we pass a value from one screen to another screen? Okay, we have several different ways we can pull this off. So we're going to initially look at Apple's intended way to do this by using their segues. All right. So we're going to go back to our storyboard here just to show this. So on our storyboard, we used Apple's built-in segue to go from page 1 to page 2. So this guy right here. This segue is going to trigger something in our code. It's going to give us an opportunity to do something during this transition before the second page actually shows up. All right, so we're going to go into our view controller. This is that page. This is that first page that's associated with that. Now, there's a function that we can put down here. I have no idea why Apple doesn't give it to us by default on this screen, because they do give it to us by default on all other code behinds that we add. So if you just come down here and you start typing prepare for segue, just start typing in the word prepare, and it's the second choice, and then just press enter on it. So this is in our view controller. I do it near the bottom, right before the final closing curly brace. Just start typing in prepare, press enter to get to prepare for segue, and press enter on that guy. And that'll put that code in there for us. Alternatively, if you would have looked at page 2 Swift and gone all the way to the bottom, that function's already there for us. We just have to uncomment it. So they provide it to us on other screens. So to uncomment this, we would have just taken that guy off and that guy off, and now this is code that we can mess with. Okay, and they give us some sample stuff in there for how to get the destination view controller and that stuff. And I'm going to show you that on this first page. So we'll go back here. So in prepare for segue, this function is going to get called, and I'm just going to prove that real quick. So we're just going to say going to page 2. I'll just do a print statement right now. So this will actually print out to the console, not to our nothing on our actual screen, but I'll show you where you can see this. So we're going to show that this code gets called as part of that transition from page 1 to page 2. So we'll go ahead and hit play. And I'll just click on go to page 2, and we're going to see that something popped up down here that says going to page 2. All right, so this guy is our way of interjecting some information before we actually arrive at page 2. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so what we'd like to do is we would like to let page 2 know about a value. So right now, rather than read a value from our text box, we're just going to pass him a string, pass him a secret value, if you will. So in order to do this, we first need to gain access to our second screen. This segue contains in it the destination view controller. That is the place we're trying to go to. So I'm going to create a variable here. We're going to say let VC equal segue dot destination view controller. All right, so now by default, segue.destination view controller is going to be a generic UI view controller. Our second page is actually a page 2 VC, not a generic UI view controller. So he's a little bit more. So we're going to specifically let Swift know that this guy is actually a page 2 VC. So we're going to use the as keyword, and we're going to put an exclamation point after it. This tells Swift, trust me, that's what this guy is. Okay. So we're going to say, grab our destination view controller, but grab him as a page 2 VC, not a generic UI view controller, because trust me, that is what he actually is. All right. So now we have programmatic access to that destination view controller through this variable. We have a variable called VC, and we can now talk to that destination view controller. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago that our first opportunity to talk to that label is inside of Viewdidload. And we're going to prove that here. So I'm going to say VC dot the label dot text. I'm going to set this to I told you so. All right, so we're setting that the label's text equal to a string, whatever string you want to put in there. Now, just so we don't forget, and just to finish this, so what did we do inside of Prepare for Segue? We grabbed our destination view controller, and we tried to set his label's text to something. From that point on, we don't need to do anything else special. So we interjected a couple of words of wisdom, if you will, before we arrived at that second screen. All right, so we're done with this little section. And just so we don't forget, we're going to go back to the page 2 VC and take out the code where we were setting this to woot. Because we definitely don't want to overwrite any transition to something other than, we don't want to overwrite our I told you so with woot. All right, so we should have nothing over here. So we're going to try on that segue to set our label to say I told you so on that second screen, letting us inform that page, that's page 2, that's we want something to occur. So we'll go ahead and run this. We'll click go to page 2, and we get an error. Bad instruction. We just tried to set the text of a label that doesn't actually exist yet. Okay, as I advertised, that second screen, those labels are not actually in existence until Viewdidload. And this guy happens before Viewdidload. This prepare for segue happens before we leave the first screen. So we're not going to be able to directly set the label this way, but we can do something else. So here's trick number 1 in order for pass stuff to our second screen in our application. We'll go to page 2. We already have our label here, but as we're seeing here, those widgets are not actually connected up yet. That communication between the interface and our code has not been made at this point. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a second variable. And we're going to call this guy the text. And we're going to just start the text off as the empty string. Actually, let's make it woot, just like we had before. Just to show this. Now what we'll do is inside of Viewdidload here, we're going to go ahead and say self.thelabel.text is equal to the text. So it should set it equal to woot at runtime. That make sense? So now this guy is just a string. He's not linked to our interface. So we would have access to him from that previous screen. So what we can do is on that previous screen, we can set this string to our variable, to our string. And then at Viewdidload, the label gets set to whatever is currently stored in that string. So just to prove that here, we'll no longer set the labels text. Instead, we're going to set, what do we call it? The text? I think we called it the text. Yep. We're going to set VC the text. And now if we hit play, when we go to page 2, we see I told you so. So we were able to pass some information from page 1 to page 2. That makes some sense?
Yes. Makes some sense? Brandon, what's up?
Still sick. What'd you say? Is there something else we had to delete?
We'll have to look at your...
Well, I have to run. So
okay, I'll look at it, Mike.
yeah, and I'll upload the recording, and so you guys can look at it later, and then I'll follow up with you. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good, Mike.
All right, you take care.
Yeah.
Bye bye.